In the last tutorial, I made my ball bounce off of my paddles. Today, I'm basically going to reset my ball when a player scores and actually update the score on the screen. So, remember how in the second last episode, I checked for collision between my ball and my top and bottom borders? Well, today, it's going to be similar in that I'm going to check for collision between my ball and my left and right borders, so that I can reset my ball at the center and advance the winning player's score. So starting off, I'm just going to go inside my while loop, and I'm going to go under border checking, and here I basically want to create some if statements like before. So starting with the left border of my screen, what I basically want to do is I want to check to see if my ball's x coordinate just about passes the x coordinate at the left border of my screen, okay? And that's how I can basically tell that my left player has lost the ball. So I'm just going to go here, I'm going to create a new line, and I'm going to create a new condition. So I'm just going to say elif, so basically otherwise if, and then I'm going to say else if ball dot x score is less than negative 390. Okay, so if you remember from before, since my screen is 800 pixels wide, then starting from my origin, the left edge of my screen is negative 400 on the x, and the right edge of my screen is 400 on the x. Okay, and you can see here that the number I have here is a bit larger than negative 400, and that's just due to the way my ball is sized. And so if I were not to do this, my ball would actually move off the screen when it reached the left border. Okay, hence the reason I set the number here to be a bit larger than negative 400. So now that I check for collision between my ball and my left border, what I basically want to do now is I want to reset my ball at the center of my screen, since the player on the left just got scored on, right? So I basically want to reset the ball. So I'm just going to create a line under my if statement, and I'm basically going to say ball dot go to and then 0 0. So this line basically places my ball at the center of my screen. And now, since my left player got scored on, I basically want my winning player, i.e. the player on the right, to start with the ball. So I'm just going to go below where I say ball dot go to, and I'm basically going to say ball dot right, and then inside parentheses I'm going to say 180. And what this line does is it completely rotates the ball so that it goes in the opposite direction that it was coming in at. Okay. Now if I run my program, you'll see that when the second player gets the ball and scores on the first player, the ball resets and it moves towards the second player since he scored. So the second player scored on the first player, and so the ball reset and it moved the direction of the second player. Okay. So now I check for collision between my ball and both of my borders. I now need to reward the player who scored the ball by increasing their score and actually updating it on my screen. And in order to do this, I'm just going to create some variables so that I can keep track of each player's score. So I'm just going to come up to the top of my program, and under where I created my screen object, I'm going to create a new line, and here I'm going to create a variable for keeping track of player 1 score. Okay, so I'm just going to say player 1 score. So that's the name of my variable, and I'm just going to give it a default value of 0. Okay, and similarly, to create a variable for player 2 score, I'm just going to come down here and say player 2 score, and I'm also going to give it a default value of 0. Okay, so now I initialize my two variables for scorekeeping. I'm now going to display each player's score onto my screen. And to do this, all I need to do is to create what's called a text object, which is basically like any of my other objects, such as my paddles and my ball, but it's in the form of a text, which I can display onto my screen. So to do this, I'm just going to go to where I created my ball object, and below it, I'm just going to create a new turtle object, okay? So I'm just going to name this scoring, and here I'm just going to give my turtle a name, okay? So I'm just going to name it score text, and I'm basically going to say turtle, okay? Since we're creating a new turtle object. And now I basically want to give my score text a color. So I'm just going to say score text dot color, and I'm basically going to set it to white, okay? I also want to make sure that my score text is not drawing on the screen. So I'm just going to say score text dot pen up, okay? And I also want to hide my turtle, okay? And finally, I want to set the position of my score text. And based on some testing, I found that 0 on the X and 220 on the Y is a good position for my text. And now, in order to actually write some text on my screen, I can just come down here and say score text dot write. And in here, I'm just going to write my text, which will just be 0, 0, separated by 6 spaces, okay? And this is because at the start of my game, when this text pops up, my players haven't scored on each other yet. And so all I need to show on the screen is simply 0, 0, okay? And you can see that I put spaces in between them so that they're, you know, nicely spaced out, right? And they're not squished together. Now, after writing my text, I also need to specify 2 more things. The first thing is going to be the alignment of my text. So I'm just going to say align and then equals, and since I basically want my text to be centered, I'm just going to say center inside quotation marks, okay? And whenever you're using the write method on your turtle object, it's also very important to include the parameter name as well, okay? So see here how I wrote align equals here? That's what you want to do, okay? So now that I set the alignment of my text to center, I'm now going to set the font of my text. So I'm just going to say font equals, and I'm just going to include 2 quotation marks. And here I'm just going to write 2 open and close parentheses, and inside of these I want to specify my font. And based on some testing, I found that Consolas is a good font to use. And I also found the font size of 30 to be good, as well as the bold font style, okay? So now if I run my program, you can see that I have the default scores of 0, 0 displayed on my screen, which is great. I now want to update my scores whenever, for example, player 2 scores on player 1, which means that I need to go inside my while loop and find the if statement for my first paddle, since my first paddle is the one being scored on, okay? So I'm just going to go inside that if statement, which as you can see is right here. And now, in order to update my score on the screen, I basically need to do 3 things. The first thing I need to do is that since my first player has been scored on, I basically want to increase my second player's score by 1. And to do this, all I need to do is to simply add 1 to player 2's score variable. So I'm just going to say player 2 score plus equals 1. Now, to actually write this score on the screen, what I first need to do is to completely delete my current score text. So I'm just going to create a new line and say score text dot clear, okay? And now all that's left to do is to write my new score on the screen. And to do this, I can just copy what I wrote at the start of my game. I'm just going to paste it in here. And now, instead of saying 0, 0, I actually want to replace that with each player's score variable, okay? So instead of this, I'm just going to say player 1 score plus player 2 score. Okay, I'm just going to remove these quotation marks, and actually I can put 6 spaces in between so it doesn't look cramped. So I'm simply going to say player 1 score plus 6 spaces plus player 2 score. Okay, and one thing to note here is, since I'm concatenating integer variables inside of a string, I actually need to convert both of them to a string. So I actually need to wrap 2 str functions around my 2 variables here. Okay, and this will basically convert my variables to a string. Okay, and now all that's left to do is to update my score for when player 1 scores on player 2. And to do this, all I need to do is to go inside my other if statement. Okay, and I'm just going to copy these 3 lines and use them here as well. Okay, and what I simply need to do here is, instead of increasing player 2 score by 1, I need to increase player 1 score by 1. Okay, since it's our first player who's scoring, right? Now if I run my program, but actually before doing so, I'm just going to increase the spacing between my numbers to 12 spaces, just so that they're a bit more spaced out. Okay, so I'm just going to go to where I updated my score text. I'm just going to change the spacing so that there's 12 spaces. Okay, so I'm just going to add 6 more spaces. Okay, and I'm also going to do the same to the text I wrote at the start of my program. Okay, so I'm just going to add 6 more spaces. And now if I go ahead and run my program, you'll see that when player 2 scores on player 1, you can see that the player 2 score is updated. And now, and as you can see, as you know, each player scores on the other, their own score increases, right? If now player 1 scores on player 2, you can see that his score increases by 1, right? So now we're at 3-2, you know, and it keeps increasing, right? So there you go. Now all that's left to do is to add some sound, which I will show you in my next tutorial.